So what does Zelensky have to do to win?
Oh, goodness me. I mean, that guy is incredible. I mean, I don't know what it must be like to be in his shoes for a day, let alone 3 years. I think the Ukrainian nation is obviously critical to this. Their solidarity and unity and resolve is what's kept them in this fight. You know, I think I said this just the other day. You look at the numbers of casualties, the imposition that country is going through. Imagine this country. You know, we struggle when toilet paper starts to run out of the supermarkets. Are we ready to have the national resolve that you might be required to defeat Russia? Because to defeat Russia, you've almost got them to make them realise that they won't win. That I am not going to give in. We're in this for the long term, which Ukraine have done brilliantly. I think the challenge now for Ukraine is that worked really well for the first year or two. What we're now seeing is an attritional war that they are struggling to maintain, either through sheer force of people, massive conscripts, etc., or through the weapon stockpiles that the West ultimately is underpinning them for. And that, for me, is the greatest concern.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Putin's lexicon involves the words, I'm going to give up. So, you know, when does it end? When's the outcome achieved? So when does the war stop?
Yeah, if only we all knew. Well, Putin dies or is pushed early to a grave, as he as often does with his own political opponents. And there's a change of regime that allows Russia an exit that they can stomach and blame it on the regime that Putin was under. That is probably a low probability event, but one day it will happen. So let's wait and see. So it does need a geopolitical shift. That we talked a little bit about with Sean there, that Macron's attempt, it's come across as rather clumsy, but I think he's been badly misrepresented. The idea that NATO is considering putting troops on the ground in Ukraine is very far-fetched. But the idea that we might is something that I'm quite a fan of. It's the reason I was a fan of the no-fly zone as a concept. It gave Russia another calculus to think through. If it's just about them and Ukraine, that's a calculation you can kind of come up with an answer to and go, right, if I just keep doing this relentlessly for another 2 years, eventually I will win. And if all I do is win what I've already won, that will be enough, he could say. So the idea, therefore, that NATO now needs to think very carefully about its messaging and about what we are prepared to stomach or put up with. Because what if Ukraine falls and Ukraine becomes a vassal of Russia? Is that acceptable to the West? I shouldn't ask you the question, should I?
So obviously, in joining the war, the objective for the West is that Putin loses.
Or doesn't win, perhaps.
Or doesn't win.
Yeah.
Okay. And the difference between the two is political.
The difference is, well, there'll be a political nuance to how that's sold, clearly. If he doesn't win, that will be seen as a loss to Putin because he's committed too far now. But if we were to get the bits of Ukraine back from 3 years ago, but ended up saying you're gonna have to let Crimea go. We now know that the Black Sea Fleet's pretty much useless anyway, so I'm not sure that Russia see much advantage in Crimea anymore. But there might be a position of negotiation that would be acceptable. Right now, Ukraine are rightly sticking to their guns and saying we want it all back.
It was interesting, though, picking up that point. I sat through the whole of his news conference just a couple of days ago, and a year ago he was incredibly bullish. He was, we're going to kick them out. This time, much more measured, and he talked about not losing rather than winning.
Yeah.
And part of the definition, so picking up your point about what not losing looked like, was retaining sovereignty.
Yeah.
And you sort of went. It started to sound like was it Finland in the Winter War, where they ceded a lot of territory, but they emerged at the far side of it with at least sovereignty, and they're a smaller country, and it's an impossible position for Zelensky to do in public, but the language was just different. Rather than winning, it was not losing. And I think there's a different narrative surrounds that.
And I think the current situation, you look at the guy, he's traveling around the world, trying to drum up support, real support, not just verbal support. It's not for us to say. He'll probably never say it in public either. What if tomorrow Putin said, if I draw the line where it is now, I'll stop. And I'll keep everything my side of the line. You can stay in power, join NATO, do whatever. That might sound quite attractive, as opposed to, no, I'm going to keep fighting back for everything you took off me. And Putin says, well, good luck. So Yeah, it's like all wars, isn't it? There has to be compromise at some point in order for something to cease. I wonder, therefore, whether Putin is going to have enough to be able to say, job done, and whether Zelensky is prepared to give up something in order to have a united Ukraine that's left, that then can come under NATO protection, can then be protected with what's left.
Okay, so our goal is to help Ukraine achieve that position, whatever it is. You've said that we've now learned a lot about Russia that we didn't know.
Yeah.
Candidly, is it also a goal, once you get into this thing, to inflict damage or depletion on the enemy as well? So it makes it a lot harder next time.
Well, I think CDS said this. It's funny how they always quote people at Chatham House. Chatham House rules, we weren't supposed to do that, but they always speak at Chatham House. He pretty much said that. His reasoning behind why he said a war with Russia for NATO is at least 5 years away, because he believes, the intelligence systems believe, that it will take them that long to rebuild a capability to the level that it will need in order to do that again. So yes, this has damaged them. I mean, for a while, it's made NATO a bit safer. For two reasons. One is Russia will take time to recover, and maybe he'll not get the political permission to fight NATO as he has with Ukraine, his special military operation. And secondly, it's woken NATO up. So that's a good thing, because NATO now will take Russia seriously again and will therefore put a proper posture in place. So in theory, the world could be getting a little bit safer in Europe because of what's happened. The question is okay, but for how long? And will this happen again? But next time, it isn't in Ukraine, it's on across a NATO boundary, in which case we're in a different scenario. So yeah, you could take a lot of positives out of this, that this actually has made the world a bit safer than it was 3 years ago, but it doesn't feel like it, and that's the challenge.
Okay, so one of the criticisms of past wars is that we win the war and lose the peace. We've got a situation between Israel and Palestine where whatever happens, there's going to be a very, very thin line between the two, which is going to be fraught with, trouble. Whatever happens between Russia and Ukraine, there's going to be a thin line. You can have Russia on one side, Ukraine on the other. How's that going to work?
Yeah, blimey, they skipped into that one. Yeah, look, any conflict, any situation as we've got in Gaza or the Middle East is always going to need a political resolution. You're not just going to fight each other to a stalemate and have one win. And you could argue, you can draw the lines of the problems we face now from the Second World War. So clearly the Second World War is still having an impact today in the modern world. So if you don't find a political solution that's acceptable to all sides, you only push the problem off for another day. It is not for me to comment on the situation in that area, but a political solution is the only final end state that will get us to something resembling peace in that area.
Yeah. Well, the other problem is Russia's got to rebuild its military capability, but in terms of the infrastructure in Russia, not much damage. Ukraine's got to build both. They've lost a lot of their infrastructure. Yeah. We were looking at the numbers a few weeks ago. It's tens of billions to rebuild Ukraine. Yeah. How's that going to be done? Where's that money going to come from?
Well, I think there's been a lot of talk about that, and I think you will see money come in. I think Ukraine, will be stronger for it at the end. And actually, I think Russia hasn't been immune to attack. Actually, Ukraine's been rather crafty in the way they've attacked some of the infrastructure quite a long way away from Ukraine. So, obviously Russia's a bigger country. But I am confident that when we eventually get to a political solution, that we'll see investment into Ukraine. I actually think it can be the only answer to bring them into NATO. If you go back and read, I think it was the Kiev Agreement, which was supposed to be an agreement between Russia, the US, and the P5 to effectively guarantee Ukraine's safety when it gave up its nuclear weapons. Well, look how long that lasted. I think next time Ukraine will have to be quite savvy that a piece of paper is not going to be enough. I want the Article 5 guarantee.
I think that chapter of history is fascinating, because the Budapest Memo, 1994,
that was the one.
And just before that, Ukraine was the third largest nuclear power in the world, because all the Russians were a former Soviet Union, were forward deployed. Yeah. They didn't have the launch codes, but they reckon they get them within a year. Yeah. And the cast iron guarantee by Putin: give up your nuclear weapons, guarantee your sovereignty. Yeah. 20 years later, whoosh, ripped it up.
And maybe that is another good lesson as well. Don't trust Putin ever again. There's no such thing as an agreement or a piece of paper or whatever. And I think there's all sorts of questions about the UN Security Council and the effectiveness of that when one of the members that has a veto is is the protagonist. Goodness me. We've created a problem there, haven't we? So, I think the lesson is here, do not trust Russia under Putin.
Bill Gates now thinks he can pretty much do anything. Yeah. He's got the best GPs in the world in his computer. Yeah. He's got the best drivers. In fact, the best of everything. Yeah. So do you think one day AI will actually fly fighter jets and therefore there'll be no further need for guys like you?
Yeah, it's all fair, and we've been under threat of this for a while now. I was reading a really good article today. It was about I forgot what it's called now, the little thing that landed on the moon the other day. It didn't know how high it was off the moon, and they were trying to change the algorithm to get one of the radars to be able to work out motion. And apparently their last real altitude feed was at something like 15 miles up. Now, if there'd have been a pilot in there, he could have eyeballed it and he'd have probably got away with it. As it happened, it landed twice as fast with 3 times as much sideway energy, and those little spindly legs it had snapped and it fell over on its side. And now it's going to slowly die because the solar panels aren't pointing at the sun. Look, machines are clever. I've got a robotic vacuum in my house. I love it. Guess who has to empty it? Muggins. Guess who has to turn it on? Muggins. Guess who has to press the app button? Muggins. And it ran over my foot the other day, so it's clearly not that clever. So I am not as convinced that we are yet in the world where machines will take over. In fact, heaven forbid we get to that place, because, whether it be driverless cars or whatever else it might be, we have got a long way away. And everyone sort of says, I want a combat vehicle aircraft that can fly without a pilot. Well, let's do trucks, eh? Let's do ships. They only do 15 knots. We haven't done that with a ship yet. So come on, let's be realistic here about what we want to allow to happen, and more importantly, what actually can happen. Because if those systems become in place, guess what? We'll attack the sensors and the systems that drive them. And the server that Bill Gates has got back in Nevada that is controlling all these systems, that'll be target number one.
Greg, we're going to wrap it up there. Greg Bagwell, thank you so much for your time. There's so much more we can talk about, and I'm sure we're going to have you back again. But thanks for giving up your time. It's been absolutely invaluable. Thank you.